Hey, Laura J here with Michael Seegers for the Michael and Laura Show, where today we are offering a special treat that these times require, and it is the ABCs of spirituality, which I coined, and I look forward to having Michael share his perspective of, because the ABCs, I believe, is addiction, belief, and chemistry. So, what I would love today is for Michael to actually speak into some of the internal chemistry that comes from addiction. Because I have come to recently believe that what we are actually addicted to is our own chemistry. And when we understand how to transmute the emotions that are showing up inside of us to be released, then we are able to make space for the grace that is waiting to fill it. So today's message is really giving us an opportunity to hear truth, see how it feels, and understand what we're feeling from a chemical perspective. And I understand what you're saying in terms of not necessarily sure about going into the science of it. And quite frankly, that's not really what I would like specifically, because I don't understand the science of it either. And I wanted to bring this message to you with a brother that has a pharmacy degree and is a biochemist too. It's like he went down the science route and I dropped out of grade 11 chemistry because I thought it was going to be too hard and I didn't think I was smart enough because of my own stories. But what I know from going through some DMT ceremonies last year, guided with a shaman, that really took me to a way deeper level than ever before. And before that, being raised by a family that don't agree with drugs, I avoided all of them except for marijuana, which has always been my peace offering, which is the reason I really wanted to make this show for you, is because I really want it for myself. I've started to understand about my own chemistry and what makes me tick. But I think that if we can have a better foundation, not necessarily going into the depth of what you may know about the periodic table and all of that super sciencey stuff that a university level person would understand. But what I think is important is for us to actually break down addiction, belief, and chemistry from the perspective of the spiritual roots of it and the chemicals that come up in us when the emotion needs to move, of which energy is the language that ultimately brings all of it together, except for we've used all these boxes to keep ourselves separate, including the box we put God into.
The box we put God into. That's interesting. I've not heard that phrase before. But I think what you're describing is common to human experience, that people try to create a concept of God, which obviously is going to be filled with limitation, because human mind doesn't have the capacity to really understand the fullness of what God is. Regarding the use of chemicals to alter consciousness, I'm not a stranger to that. I've certainly filled my resume with a long list of errors and foolishness in my youth, shall we say?
Yeah.
To my detriment many times along the path, where injury was profound, and finding myself involved with the medical establishment, looking for solutions that they were really not equipped to provide. And this subject matter is not unknown to the masters. They have extensive commentary on this. If we search back throughout history, we find the use of substances in all cultures, going back tens and hundreds of thousands of years. There is no question that the normal consciousness of our daily life is a very, very small piece of what's available. And when substances are used carelessly, the results will definitely be less than ordered, and the tendency towards chaos, disorder, accident is markedly increased. When these substances are used in a manner such as in a shamanic tradition, or as psychiatrists in the 60s and 70s were suggesting that there would be a guide who would take the person through the levels of consciousness, and the guide would require extensive training. You could have very powerful and life-changing positive experiences. I remember that LSD was used in the 60s quite effectively to cure alcoholism with a single dose, and follow-up studies indicated 10 years later, 15 years later, that the people had not fallen back into alcoholism. And when you compare that to the 12-step method of AA, their track record of success is far below that. So there is certainly evidence to suggest there can be positive and helpful use with these substances, but on a much higher level, the masters continue to indicate to us that, as they term it, it is storming the gates of heaven by force, and that natural methods that the masters teach are far more effective, far more proper, and far safer. So one of the dangers following this path of chemical induction of altered states of consciousness is addiction, addictive behavior, the desire to reproduce that state of consciousness for its uniqueness, for its pleasantness, for whatever it is that's appealing to you, and wanting to continue doing that again and again and again, and then coming to a point where you discover that it's difficult to say no. People think marijuana is quite harmless. I did for many years, and I found myself stuck for many years, unable to give it up. And it was nice to have the excuse that it helped me sleep better at night. But it really disturbed me that when I tried to give it up, it was so difficult to do so. And in the literature, we discovered that the masters call it the death drug. And that's a pretty strong term. And from mainstream perspective, we would look at that and say, well, come on, it's not heroin. People aren't dying from it. But the truth is, it's the death of the soul. It's killing the inner drive. There are things that we are here to do in life that will never happen if we stay caught up in that cannabis fog. And that's what it is. It's an absolute dense fog. And then there's a much more sinister aspect to all of that, and that's the fact that there is a spiritual component to that. Not just mental, not just psychological, not just emotional, not just chemical. There is a spiritual component to that, and it's very dark, it's very evil. All conditions of consciousness that are less than harmonious, less than healthy. When we use the term dis-ease, we're talking about not at ease. And it could be manifesting physically, like a cancer, like a heart condition, like an infection. It could be manifesting as an emotional condition, a mental disorder. Every dis-ease condition has its associated entities that are involved with it. So when we hear about demonic possession, we tend to think in extremes, like the movie The Exorcist, and people that are clearly, visibly controlled by some dark force. But it's no different with schizophrenia. It's no different with psychological disorders. It's no different with addiction. It's no different with cigarette smoking. Nicotine, tobacco has its own entity. And so that this is all happening on an invisible level, and it's very powerfully controlling behavior. And there are dark forces that are working with and using these entities for their own ends, which are certainly not of the light. And all of this adds to the intensity of the addiction and the difficulty in giving up the use of the substance. And so there's tremendous danger, largely not recognized and certainly not spoken about by people who are in the habit of choosing pleasure through chemical means. And it's very common in our society. And I would say alcohol is one of the most common, and it's just accepted. Even taking a single drink alters your consciousness and the flow of light through your four lower bodies profoundly. And it's something that I chose many years ago not to be involved with anymore. And by God's grace, I haven't had a drink and I haven't been involved with drugs in well over 20 years. And I enjoy a level of consciousness today that really few people have access to because they're still caught up in their pleasure-seeking pastimes and their chemical induction of altered states. And so there's tremendous danger, largely not recognized and certainly not spoken about by people who are in the habit of choosing pleasure through chemical means. So there's my introductory comment for you.
Thank you. And I think that this is so poignant because it's true. And I know from my own journey how much time I have divested away from my dream and purpose in order to roll a doob, go outside, to smoke it, to chill, to do all of those things that people really enjoy when in the experience of breathing deeply, of calling themselves back present, of having a ceremony that we can induce ourselves because we are creatures that crave the sacred. And the truth is that's been lost because it's been covered. It wasn't lost by accident. It was lost on purpose because, as Michael says, this is a spiritual war. That was why the first podcast we did for the Peaceful Inner Warriors United podcast was on spiritual warfare and the nature of energy veils or evil, as you and we would more commonly refer to it. But if you actually think of this fog and the addiction being an entity itself, what is an entity but a thought form that has accrued interest by receiving more energy to it?
It's interesting that you described it that way. Is it a thought form? I'm not sure. You're getting close. Everything is part of consciousness. Consciousness is the fabric of the universe. Consciousness exists everywhere. So a rock has consciousness, a flower has consciousness, everything has consciousness. There's no question that entities have consciousness. And they are created by a more highly evolved consciousness that is not of the light. Are they created as a thought form? I'm not sure. But that was a very interesting description that you provided, and I think it does have some accuracy to it. I don't claim to be an expert on what entities are or what they're created from or how they are manufactured. I just know that in the energy of all that exists here in the lower planes, you will not find those entities in the spiritual planes. They will not exist up there, but they definitely exist down here. And there are so many of them. There are entities involved with every emotion. So there are entities of lust, of sexuality, of um, all the different substance abuse, of depression, um, of greed, of think of any character flaw, and there is an entity associated with it. So there are these invisible, conscious, intelligent energies that are part and parcel of human behaviors, and you'll find them in all the addictions. You can be addicted to anything. People who are addicted to gambling will tell you it's very difficult to quit. They don't understand how they're tied into a gambling entity, which is a horrific, powerful entity on a planetary scale that actually works with what the masters call the suicide entity. And the suicide entity is probably the most dangerous entity on the planet. And and these entities will very sneakily inject thoughts into your mind about, yeah, it's a really good idea. You might as well just go back home to God. Just kill yourself, get it over with, because your life is useless. You're not accomplishing anything. And people often speak to me in terms of, I just want to go home. And they honestly believe that going home means if I just die, I'll go back to God. And that's not how it works. But that is part of the deception that comes into the consciousness when the suicide entity is involved. And it's a horrifically powerful entity. So the whole addiction challenge, in my opinion, cannot be addressed properly if it's not addressed spiritually. And when I went through my challenges and the things I had to give up, I attended a couple of 12-step meetings, and I walked out of there very disappointed and said to myself, that's not going to work for me. And I chose a spiritual solution, working with Archangel Michael and learning how to cut myself free with the sword of Archangel Michael. And I knew that I had to substitute old habits with new ones. And I thought, well, if I make myself so busy doing good that I don't have time to think about these previous behaviors and patterns, eventually I'll get through this by God's grace. And I did. And I chose avenues of service that kept me extremely busy until I had burned out all momentums and desires of the previous unhealthy behaviors, and was able to achieve a brand new balance in my life, and a brand new peace and freedom in my life. And I strongly recommend anybody who is contemplating making the kind of lifestyle changes that involve getting rid of addictive behavior, find a spiritual practice that brings you back to your authentic self, that brings you into a space of truth, and that allows you to really focus your energy on who you are and bring yourself back into this world. Because through the addictive behavior, you've been hiding from this world. You've been avoiding this world. Remember Tony Robbins in a very famous piece that he spoke, and I don't remember who he's quoting, but he said, our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. And people often don't know that, haven't had a chance to really contemplate that. We walk into a place like an elevator, and everybody is silent, and nobody wants to make eye contact. And we have those moments where we experience the awesome power of being, and it's overwhelming. Have any encounter with another person. Sit down, have a coffee, and don't talk, and see what happens. People become uncomfortable very quickly. They call it the awkward silence. Well, why is it awkward? They want to fill the space with sound, with noise, with talking, with chatter, with something, with some distraction that takes them away from the awesome power of being. Because it's truly the greatest fear that we have, discovering and being in that pure, authentic being. It's powerful. It's frighteningly powerful.
People don't understand about who we really are. at the base. I was going to say people don't understand the threefold flame of power, wisdom, and love within our heart center, which is a teaching of the ascended masters that is coming out now on a bigger scale than ever before, because we need it. Because if we are truly afraid of our power, then and we don't understand what drives us, we don't have access to the passion that comes from that burning desire within us to come home to ourselves. So many people think that the house that they live in is their home, and it is, but our body is our home, and our native star system is our home. And many souls, especially now who are here, feel like they have a longing for home they don't understand, because especially ones who are open to and committed to actually pursuing a spiritual path, many are star beings from other systems that have come here to help humanity with the Great Awakening and the shift that is taking place right now collectively, where we have gamma rays blasting down on us, activating light codes within our DNA to change it and help turn the 12 strands of DNA that have been offline back online. There
Can
are
I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
Everybody who encounters information about 12-strand DNA is encountering false hierarchy information.
Perfect. Tell us
So
about
I want to make that clear that in 100 years of Ascended Master literature, 12-strand DNA has never been mentioned. That is something that comes through false hierarchy, channeled nonsense. I try to be very careful about specific terminology. Light codes, nothing wrong with that. But often it leads into or leads from a conversation that came from false hierarchy misinformation. There are light waves, light rays on thousands of frequencies that our science has never recognized, that are coming in from planets, from stars, from cosmic beings. And they are absolutely activating, if you want to call them light codes, things within us. And I'm okay with talking about that kind of understanding. I want to be clear that all this talk about 12-strand DNA is nonsense.
I love it. And the beautiful thing that you opened up with that is the premise that not all information is good information. And just because we heard it from someone who had a lot of conviction in what they believe and where they got the information, earlier you had said about the entities not being outside of the earth plane. And from my training with accessing the Akashic records through soul realignment, we have negative astral planes and we have positive astral planes. So
Well, that is absolute falsehood.
Okay, say more.
Using the language of the masters, the astral plane can be described as a sewer. It is filled with horrors. It is filthy. There is no positive astral plane. That's absolute incorrect. The astral plane is where all the black magicians and all the negative entities are. The masters are on the etheric plane, which is vibrating on a much, much higher level. And we are warned against being involved with anything on the astral plane. So even the concept of Akashic records, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. And there are people who believe that they can access Akashic records. And here's what the masters have taught us. The masters, and very few who are not masters, may access the Akashic records. And those records are on the etheric plane, which is the highest vibrating plane in the 4 major divisions of the material world. And is the plane of memory, and is where the halls of records are. On the astral plane, the false hierarchy, all the imposters who pretend to be ascended masters have their own cities they've created. And they've created them in such a way that they appear to be very similar to the cities of light that exist on the etheric plane. The masters have their retreats on the etheric plane where souls may travel in their light body during sleep to attend classes at the University of the Spirit. The false hierarchy has created their own retreats on the astral plane and made them to look just like the retreats of the masters on the etheric plane. And so souls who do astral travel will be duped into attending classes in these supposed retreats of the false hierarchy, imposters of the masters, and will be caught up in those activities for multiple lifetimes, and will be engaged in activities such as believing they are reading Akashic records, which are completely false, and they will be creating karma by that involvement that will keep them locked into that vibrational frequency like a fish on a hook, and will require lifetimes and tremendous work to become disengaged from that. And so we often find students who come into the teachings of the masters and they progress along the path and they go very deep into the teachings and then encounter this truth about false hierarchy and discover they can't let it go and still want to go to books and websites and information that comes from confirmed false hierarchy sources and refuse to believe the truth about that. And the hook stays embedded. The masters have said, they've warned us repeatedly, that opening the true Akashic records should not be done because energy and karma that has been sealed for your safety will now become a weight that you cannot bear. It will be a karmic burden so heavy it may kill you in a short period of time. And I've known 3 people who had past life regression or Akashic reading with somebody who actually was able to open those records, and they were dead within 2 years. And the person doing the opening of the record, well-intentioned, good-hearted, uninformed people thinking they're providing a service for others, actually creating great harm. And the masters have talked about this. And when you look at the Ascended Master Kuthumi, and he has extensive teaching on this, as I said, masters don't contradict other masters. Then you go to Radiant Rose Academy, and you see they've got on YouTube a special ceremony supposedly by Kuthumi to open your Akashic records. How could that be true if Kuthumi said don't ever do it? So there's a lot of misunderstanding about that, and it's much more dangerous than people imagine, because when you die 2 years later from a weird car accident or fell off a bicycle, or suddenly cancer developed overnight and took you out 2 weeks later, and you wonder where that came from, you don't necessarily connect the dots and say, oh, that was the karmic weight that got unloaded on me when the record got unsealed, and what was held back for my protection suddenly fell upon me as a burden I couldn't bear. So I wanted to bring that information out to you. We had never had a chance to talk about that before. But there's a lot of supposed Akashic readings people are doing that is coming from the astral plane, and it's complete deception. So I just had to say that.
That's brilliant, because the thing about life is we're all doing the best we can with what we know, and when we do know better, we can do better. But the problem is when we think we know better and don't, and that brings us back to the nature of addiction, which is the desire inherently for us to experience something other than what we are experiencing, the desire to have contrast in order to know ourselves, the mirror experiences that give us opportunities to see who we are and whose we are and whose we're not, and who whose we're not. And so the devil does make evil look really good by using the D of good and just disguising evil for something other than it is. And it's because of all of the energetic veils. But unless you have access to the level of training that someone like you have done to be able to discern the information and then correct people when you hear a mistruth that they're spouting, how do people deal with all of the competing information that is disguised as good when it's not?
That's a fantastic question, and it reminds me of something I learned in grade 1 as a little Catholic schoolboy. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. And that goes hand in hand with man, know thyself. Seek wisdom. Wisdom is the prime thing. So there is an inner attunement that's required to accomplish that, which requires authentic presence. It requires being alone by yourself in silence and really going within and not having that process clouded by the fog of cannabis or by the fantastic psychedelic experiences of DMT and ayahuasca and LSD. Those are such powerful distractions. They're exhilarating, they're exciting, they're fantastic. And they're very, very difficult to deal with responsibly. So there needs to be a going within in yoga, which is the science of oneness, of bringing you back into reconnecting with your higher self. They begin with the breath. They say that breath is the horse and mind is the rider. And so by learning some very simple breathing exercises and actually taking the time to do them, where you sit down with, there's no stereo, there's no TV, your telephone is turned off, you're undisturbed, and you focus on your breath for 10 minutes. I find people can't do 1 minute of a stillness exercise. I have to begin many students with 10 seconds, where the exercise is the only thing that you can move is your eyelids. You're allowed to blink. You don't move your tongue inside your mouth. You don't wiggle your toes. You just don't move. Stillness. Begin with 10 seconds. Get yourself up to a minute. It has profoundly beneficial impact. And from stillness to breathing and disciplined breathing and focusing on breathing, you can bring the mind into a very helpful and productive place and reconnect with yourself, because deep down inside, you're a divine being. You need to reconnect with that.
And we're going to do a teaching about the chart of the divine presence, which I know you said you did a very succinct definition in a recent introduction class that you did with students that you wanted to share. And that's amazing, and I would still love to come together and do that so that people who are more familiar with me at this point have access to what you do too, because that teaching about the fact that there is a picture of God attached to a silver cord above each of us ultimately is something most people are unfamiliar with, and the fact that Christ consciousness is in between. And so many people are afraid of even mentioning God or to talk about Jesus because they don't understand who Jesus was. They don't understand what God is. And because it has become such hostile territory, for so many because of the families we come from and the BS within the home tribe. We don't know how to get past that. And so then we just hide from our own nature because we know inherently that we do have a godly nature at our core, which is where the heart burns with power, wisdom, and love. Or no, I see your movement.
No, your picture froze. I missed part of that.
Okay, what part did you miss?
It was brief. It was only about 5 seconds.
Okay. I I notice movement. I notice subtleties. I notice energy. And I always have, but I didn't know that. And so part of my journey, I'll say, especially with last year's trip into the mental institution that I oftentimes reference because of how traumatic that was, because of how horrifying it was to be a privileged white girl from a good family that has high standards for how to live, even though we don't necessarily have a religious foundation. I never thought that my freedoms could be taken away the way that they were and the way that I see it playing out culturally now. But I'm grateful for that experience because it came after doing 8 DMT ceremonies, dimethyltryptamine, which was with a shaman. So I did try to get support. It was just when you don't know how to integrate energies after the fact and you don't understand what's already inside, it's very difficult to create a harmonic space. And when we use those external substances or just the external triggers, like even exercise can be something we're addicted to because of the serotonin rush we get. And cortisol is connected with the stress hormone that we're driven by because we're more inclined oftentimes to move away from pain than we are driven by pleasure, of which is our natural state. When we actually tune in, peace is what we find. But when we're trying to add, we don't experience our own nature or understand it. And then the things that we notice that other people might not, we then think we're strange or weird, or it was nothing. I shouldn't have said anything. And then we belittle ourselves for going down a rabbit hole that was true, that did actually have a cue that I was aware of, even though it wasn't spoken. And these are the things that we're coming together to talk about, because if we won't talk about the things that are not acceptable in the tribe that we had to conform in order to belong to, how ever will we be able to become all of who and whose we truly are?
I had a conversation just a couple of days ago with a gentleman who, in the last couple of years, had noticed there were times when he saw blue lights flashing around him that other people couldn't see. And of course, he had that same thought about, is this real? Can I talk about this? What will people think? But he had started to notice a pattern that they seemed to be an indicator of a truth and would show up at the most interesting moments when a truth had been spoken, or when he was about to make a decision to go left, go right, what was the course of action, and when he took the proper course of action, he would see these blue lights flashing. And I said to him, the universe will show you many signs. I used to get mine from license plates on cars, and it would be speaking in a language that seemed only I could read, but it was always 100% accurate, and I knew how to count on it as a guidepost along the way. And I suggested to him that if he would do the same thing, if he would just trust his inner guidance system and use it that way, he would benefit powerfully. And just to hear me say that to him was transformative. Somebody didn't think he was crazy, and somebody actually spoke about it in a very meaningful way. So seeing energy, yeah, it's amazing what people see or feel or sense, and often don't have a reference or a context for it, and then feel like they can't speak about it. So
If you're in the mental institution, you literally, that is a box that gets checked for you to get a diagnosis and then be wrecked by the medication that gets imposed on one who is not sane enough to decide for themselves what they need. Well, physician, heal thine own self. We are the medicine men and women of the past who lost the title of native healers simply because profits became more important than people. We have a chemical pharmacy inside of us, each of us. We already are the most intricate machine there has ever been designed, other than all the rest of the animals, of which are all very well put together and beautiful and amazing too, except we have consciousness to be able to perceive our environment and all of these energies and then be able to make stories about them. And even those stories then become the belief system that we base our life on. And whether that belief system is serving us or not generally shows up in our feelings and how we are able to be in this world.
And this is the profound difference between human consciousness and ascended master consciousness, because the human consciousness is always limited by the cultural paradigm, which is microscopic compared to the full consciousness that masters have access to, and that we have access to once we learn how to reconnect with our inner divine self.
So how do you do that for somebody that is completely new to all of this?
Well, you have to have the patience to begin the process. The longest journey begins with a single step. And there has to be an understanding that it's going to take time. You're not going to get there today or tomorrow, but you're going to move toward it. And consciousness is progressively unfolding without limit. So that where I exist today is far beyond where I thought was possible 20 years ago, and 40 and 50 years ago. And when I was involved with LSD and substances, I thought I was experiencing the type of consciousness that was not available by any other means. And today I've come to understand that I've gone farther than even those visions would take me. So it's progressive, and it's just enjoy the journey. Just start moving towards it. Just start really seeking authentic presence, seeking good mentors. I have always looked for the best of the best in mentors in every field. When I studied science, when I studied biochemistry, when I studied business, success coaches in life, I always wanted to know who's got the fruit on the tree, who's really harvesting properly, who's the best of the best. And I put my own personal education as being much more important to acquisition of things. I would watch people spend money on a lottery ticket. I would go buy a book. I would see people spending money on something for a vacation. I would take a course. So I continued to work on myself and build myself and grow myself so that I could have what I was really looking for, which is the level of consciousness that was not available by being immersed in distractions, being immersed in entertainment, being immersed in avoidance, and all the things that people get stuck into because that's what everybody around them is doing. So the Ascended Master Saint Germain has a phrase that I like to repeat: come apart now and be a separate and chosen people. You have to really choose authentic presence. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in the mire of that world out there. You can exist in that world. I often say, I don't live in that world. I just interface with it. But where I live internally in consciousness is somewhere far outside that world, because most of it is nonsense and all of it is illusion. So you had a question as to how. You have to find a spiritual teacher that you trust. You have to begin spiritual exercises. I remember for me in the 1970s, I found the book Autobiography of a Yogi. And that really was helpful in pointing me in a direction. I had initially learned yogic breathing from a gentleman who was in a Rosicrucian tradition. I had studied esoteric Buddhism, so I was very much practicing particular meditations. And for a time, it will not matter what path you're choosing, as long as you're choosing a path that requires discipline, that begins to structure your thinking and begins to require of you the discipline of your energies, so that you actually dedicate time to it on a regular basis and make it part of your daily life. And there will be an inner attunement that starts to occur naturally through that. Your guides and guardians and guardian angels and all those energies that assist you will lead you to who is your next proper teacher. And eventually you will come to find the ascended masters, who are the true teachers. And you will discover that all those paths lead to the one path, the path of ascension, whereby you can walk the path of initiation, where the masters will train you, they will initiate you, and they will guide you to the ascension portal, where you can make your ascension at the close of this embodiment. Or if you haven't balanced sufficient karma, you will probably be able to make your ascension at the close of the next embodiment, and you will get on to becoming an immortal ascended being and fulfill your destiny. But start somewhere. Start with truth. Start with good teachers. Start with a spiritual practice, and allow yourself to be guided until you're ready. Many people come to speak to me, and they're not ready for this teaching. They're not ready for the Ascended Masters. They're not ready to surrender many of the human behaviors. They're not ready to submit to the disciplines and the obedience that's required. You have to be obedient to the truth, to the light within. And it will require many things become discarded, recognized as not useful, recognized as harmful, and discarded. And many people are not willing to do that with their ego, with their ideas, with their thoughts and positions about things. Well, I shouldn't have to do. Well, okay, you don't think you should have to, then go back into where you've been. That's what happens.
And Don Miguel Ruiz, when I interjected before you carried on with very important wisdom to just approach the journey one step at a time and continue to move forward, is Don Miguel Ruiz from the Four Agreements, a
Yes.
wisdom guide. He talks about the mitote as being the grand illusion and dream that we're all caught up in thinking is real, just like the Matrix. And ultimately, of the Four Agreements, the very first is be impeccable with your word, which means to be without sin. And the notion of sin, which so many who do choose an external substance and feel weak for it, or who choose something outside of themselves that can stimulate the chemical concoction within us that we're addicted to, like exercise or shopping, sex, or any kind of instant gratification, even just food, which how do you stop eating food if that's what you're addicted to? You treat the roots. You actually get back to the fact that sin is to be without grievance towards yourself, to be good to yourself, to stay in tune with the authentic presence that you had mentioned, which is when we are fully present rather than veiled over top of the truth. which we do to ourselves. How often and why? And it's like, wow, sometimes as I alter my own state, it's just like I am a really good player of life that sometimes feels the need to make things more difficult just for the contrast. Really? That's sometimes the thought that goes in my mind as I succumb to my own human needs or desires and wants. And so through that process, why I share this so candidly, and Michael, thank you for doing this too. Ultimately, why we do this is for you to know that all of us who are here are just doing our best one step at a time. That's how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. How you climb a mountain, one step at a time. How you do anything is you just take the next step. When you realize that you stepped on something that is not going to be able to support you, you have the opportunity to step backwards. Understanding we do live in a universe of cause and effect. And so if we can get back to the root cause of the desire to escape the moment and being fully present with the power we have in it, then we can really make change and also stand before you as imperfectly perfect beings too, not needing to be anything other than just who and whose we all are, and to get back to the truth of who we are as individuals within that macrocosm that we're all part of.
There is an aspect of inner work that is very easily avoided, and it has to do with your inner child. And when we talk about the soul, the masters describe that as the inner child. And much of what goes on in psychology of people that are not as well as they would like to be is because they're not nurturing their inner child. And it takes work. And I know I have friends who I observe in what I see as distressful conditions that they choose not to acknowledge. They will not speak about it. They have their own definitions of success, and they keep themselves so busy that there is no opportunity to have a conversation about this or to even think about this. And that inner child work never gets done. And the conditions that are observed by those who love them never get discussed. And we just have to sit back and watch that individual go through the pain that they're going through. Most people don't want to do that kind of work. The inner child work is very powerful. And there is a child within all of us that really requires nurturing because it has been wounded from the first slap on the bum when it came out of mommy's womb and all the torment of life and what happened during pregnancy. What was that fetus experiencing? Were mommy and daddy fighting? Was there violence, anger in the environment? All those vibrations impacting the soul coming in its most delicate state have a profound influence on the individual later in life.
It's the cultural trauma that all of us have been literally bred in the womb of, because all of us come from traumatized people for the most part, even if it's just the perception of trauma from someone that experienced something and felt hurt by it, that gets internalized if not dealt with. And I absolutely love that you spoke of the soul as the inner child, because truly, literally, yesterday I went to lunch with a friend, and when he told me something, I clapped and gleed and did the things that I normally do, and I realized how childlike I am in terms of how the joy just overflows, and then I do things that may seem weird or off the wall to a lot of people, just because I am just delighting and exciting in what life is offering, because I've been on this spiritual path for 10 years, devoted and not perfect by any means, but just really doing my best to be nicer to the inner child, and I always said children within, because it's each of those moments in our history where we have taken on someone else's judgment and then auto-domesticated ourselves, which Don Miguel Ruiz also talks about in the Four Agreements, that I think is a must-read book. And it's like we have taken out so much of the inner kingdom and the rooms within it that we think that we're just this broken down bungalow that needs a lot of TLC. And that may not be true.
I'm just enjoying a moment of stillness.
And those are beautiful too. And I am aware that we are at the top of our time together. So I would love to give Michael an opportunity to give a final word in this third episode of the Michael and Laura Show.
Final word, what would you like to hear?
Surprise us. Delight us.
Oh, I have nothing.
No thing is sometimes not a bad thing.
How about I am nothing?
I am no thing.
God is everything. Therefore, I am God.
Great final words.
The
Wow.
divinity within us has spoken.
Truly. It's that well analogy. It's just like, what are we full of? If we're full of ourselves, we have no space for God.
Therefore, I am nothing. Therefore, God is all. Therefore, I am God.
And I am all in that. Love it. Beautiful. Thank you, Michael Seegers, for bringing these insights to you who have stuck with us for the whole show or parts of it, whatever you came here for. We hope you got. We would love to know what your questions are, so please do comment below to let us know. Like the video and be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you are able to gain access to more shows when Michael and I come on to share what people need right now from our perspective and the perspectives of the Ascended Masters Michael has devoted himself to the study of for the last 40 years. So would love to see you again very soon and look forward to seeing all of what you are curious about. So thank you in advance for the comments, and sending you huge love, gratitude, and appreciation for all that you are and all that you will do in this world when you wake up to who and whose you truly are. Thanks so much. Laura J., Michael Seegers. Toodaloo.
Thank you.